watching Property TV.
Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and I want to welcome you to Spotlight on France. And joining me today is Joanna Leggett, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier. And welcome to you, Joanna.
Thank you, Stephen. It's nice to be back.
Good to have you in this country. I'm going to ask you something about all this travel chaos before we start. So did you come in okay?
Yeah, I flew this time. I usually do drive and there usually isn't any problems at all. I think it's just a blip and I think it will get sorted out pretty soon. But yeah, it's obviously the summer. It's prime time. Everybody's gone on holiday. The French all go on holiday in August, so everything's closed. So it might be a little bit worse then. But I'm sure it'll be sorted out fairly quickly.
I mean, it's in everybody's interest to sort it out, isn't it? I mean, the French want our money for tourism. And
yeah.
I'm sure a lot of French come here and enjoy London.
Well, not just the French, because obviously it's quite a transient country. People are travelling through France to Spain and Portugal and everywhere else in cars. So I'm sure they'll get it sorted fairly soon.
I know we've talked about the effects of Brexit before, Joanna, when we've had you on the show, but have you really noticed much difference since we've left?
I think initially there was a little bit of chaos because on top of Brexit we had COVID, so people weren't working in the departments and so things weren't moving very quickly. But now it's quite simple. I mean, bearing in mind it's not just British that buy in France. We've had Americans, South Africans and all of those buying in France for years before. So it's just adapting. We just got to do things a little bit more paperwork than there is normally. But actually it hasn't really had any adverse effects.
And how about cost of living and inflation? Is that affecting France the same way as it's affecting you?
Yeah, the property market's extremely strong in France at the moment. So things are selling very quickly. And because of that, the property prices are going up, particularly rural and countryside properties, because obviously COVID has effect on that. And we're seeing lots of particularly Parisians or French people that live in cities moving out to the countryside because it's enabled people to be able to work from home. So, why work from a 2-bedroom house when you can have a 5-bedroom house with a swimming pool and loads of land? So we are seeing that the countryside properties that are usually fairly stable are starting to go up as well.
And has the market in the sort of Alps and skiing areas held up?
That remains the same. It just goes up the same as inflation. The property prices will go up there. It's always a good investment area at the Alps to buy because you've got all year round rental potential. It's always going to be popular. It's some of the best skiing in Europe. So that is still a strong market as it always has been.
Okay, great. Well, look, Joanna, we've done one of these spotlight programs before, so I think we'll stick to pretty well the same format. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about moving to France that we've had sent in. And then in the second half of the show, I'm going to ask you to give us one of your verbal tours of France and take us through the various areas. And I think it'd be interesting to see how all these areas are stacking up against each other and which are the most popular. Okay, so the first question we've had is this. I'm considering retiring and relocating to France. I prefer to be in an area where there are a reasonable number of ex-UK residents and perhaps where the weather is a little better than the UK. Well, I think that's going to be pretty tough this year, isn't it? Having just started my search, I'm suddenly struck with the size of France, and I'd really appreciate some guidance on suitable areas.
Well, France is the biggest country in Western Europe, so it is huge, and the areas do vary, which we'll talk about later on in the show. But I would say it would come, all areas have Brits, and generally speaking, particularly...
We're everywhere, aren't we?
Yeah. The Brits just have a love of France. I'd say that Eastern France, like areas like the Alsace, there isn't so many Brits in that area, and it's a little bit colder. But anywhere you come into France is always going to be warmer than the UK anyway. By, the most northern parts, probably about 3 or 4 degrees higher than it is in the UK. But as you come further south, we've had, as the UK has, we've had extraordinary temperatures. We were 43 degrees last week in the Dordogne. Wow. So, it can get very hot. So weather-wise, you won't have a problem. If you wanted it to be slightly cooler, you might want to come slightly into the areas like Burgundy or the centre of France, which you do have a little bit more rainfall, which does cool the areas down. But most Brits buy from Pas de Calais all the way around, all the way down the coastal regions, depending on your budget. You know, budget has a big effect on where you buy, because, for example, in Brittany, you could buy a 3-bedroom house for €80,000. That same bedroom house in the south of France would probably cost you €300,000. So it really depends on where you're looking. But as I would say, there's lots of areas. The Dordogne is extremely popular with Brits. In some towns, 10% of the population is Brits, not all of them. But I wouldn't let some people, that might put people off. But to be fair, it's not just Brits. That you'll have Belgians, you'll have Americans, it's very international. You know, you'll have Belgians, Germans, Dutch, and British are the main nationalities that buy in those type of particular areas.
Okay, I noticed the question says that they're suddenly struck by the size of France. I mean, is that a frequent occurrence?
It is actually, because what we notice is when clients are booking visits and they say, oh, it's in the Dordogne, so we want to look at that one, that one, and that one, and that one, and it's like, the Dordogne is huge in itself. You know, it could take 2.5 hours to get to the other side of it. Right. So it is very large. But the lovely thing about it is there's no traffic. So because it's so big, the roads are really well maintained. So you can drive, you know, if it says it's going to take you 30 minutes, it will take you 30 minutes. You're not going to get stuck in traffic and it takes you an hour. Unless you're in cities, of course, Paris, for example, you would get it. But in the most of the areas outside, which is where most of the Brits buy, there isn't any traffic.
Talking about traffic and motoring and all the rest of it in France, is there much difference now, again, that we're out of Europe? Are there any extra restrictions or requirements?
Well, they were talking about having to change your driving licence, but that hasn't happened. So you can still drive on a UK licence unless you have in some sort of trouble or speeding or something like that, then you would have to change it to a French licence. You can't insure cars if they're British. So if you're moving permanently, you would have to get your car put onto French driving licence plates, or buy a French car, which is probably cheaper.
The easier way.
Because because also you've got the import tax now because of Brexit. So you've got to pay the tax on the car as well. So if you were thinking about moving to France, I'd sell your car in England and buy one in France. Yes. It's a lot easier and a lot less paperwork.
Well, I know we've come across that question before, haven't we? And I think you're right. And I mean, I know when I used to work in Spain, I think people try and take a bit of England with them, and it just doesn't work, does it? You know.
Well, it's quite funny because I've been into some houses that we've had for sale, and people have put English plugs in because they've brought all their equipment, which is like the TVs and everything. And it's like, well, when you're going to sell it, you're going to have a little bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Especially if you're selling to anyone in Europe, you know, you need the plugs. But yeah, I think the cars is probably a main thing because a lot of people love their car. You know, Trevor does, as you know. And so, and the boss. So I would suggest that they do sell the car and buy something in France.
Okay. Have you mentioned that to Trevor? I mean, how many has he got now?
I think he's got over 40.
Really?
All old vintages, yeah.
All right. Okay, Joanna, question 2. Can the overseas property experts advise me as how to be sure the previous owners of French property I'm considering purchasing have fully complied with their obligations to register any improvements to the property that would subsequently affect the taxes to be paid on the property? If such improvements hadn't been notified, would I be responsible as the new owner for any past liabilities? I think probably, Joanna, if you could just explain the rule on that to start with.
Okay, so if you were looking at extending the property or putting an extension on or changing the use, so for example, if the property had a barn and you converted it, you would need planning permission for that. So the way you can tell is because the notaires will hold the original deeds. So when we take a property on, we have to get a copy of those original deeds because then we can see the cadastral plan, the areas that are owned. They may have sold some off, which we have to find out from the local mairie, but it will also show you on that plan what was originally there. So if we see, oh, there's a barn and now it's a house, we would have to ask, and the notaire would ask for the planning permission. So everything would be done prior to the sale. So if there had been no planning permission for the barn, which is a CU, they'd have to get to do that, then that we would have to do retrospective planning. So you wouldn't be able to buy it until all of that had been approved anyway. But it would all be looked at beforehand. It's very rare that happens because generally speaking in France, you can do whatever you like inside the property without planning. You can take out walls, unless it's a listed building, but they don't have as many of those as they do in the UK.
What about building regulations? Anything?
They don't have building regulations. So, for example, if you wanted to convert the loft, you can do it. You can just do it, and it just is classed as another bedroom. For example, in my property, when I bought the property, it was 2 bedrooms, but they were very big bedrooms. I've made it into 4 bedrooms now and 3 bathrooms. However, when I go to sell that, obviously the tax for the bedrooms, because the more bedrooms you have, the more tax you'll pay. It's not huge amounts, it might be 10 euros or 20 euros more, but it will be increased. If you put a swimming pool in, again, if you haven't got the planning permission for that, because you do need planning permission for swimming pools, the notaire or the current owner would have to apply for retrospective planning. But generally speaking, everybody knows everybody, particularly if you're in a rural area, and the mayor will know what's going on. So generally speaking, it's very rare that we find something that hasn't had planning. Yeah.
Little chance of it slipping through then.
Yeah, very little chance.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, good. Well, that's very helpful. Just finally on that, Joanna, if something did slip through, are you responsible as a new owner?
No, it would be the notaire. It's very rare that anything could slip through.
Okay.
So, because everything has to be checked. The notaires aren't like solicitors. They actually are government tax collectors.
Okay.
So only about 1% of the fee that you pay the notaire goes to them. 1 or 2%. It's quite low. The rest of it is all government taxes. So they're paid by the government as such and by the client.
And totally independent.
And totally independent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They don't work. They work for both the buyer and the seller.
Good.
So,
Joanna, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join me again after the break when we'll be asking Joanna to take us on one of her wonderful verbal tours of France.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Joanna, welcome back. What I'm going to ask you to do is take us on your wonderful verbal tour of the French hotspots. Perhaps you could tell us a brief description of the areas, price guides sort of top to bottom, and sort of popularity amongst expats to move there. So let's start off at the top.
Okay, so when you're looking at buying a property, you've got to consider different things. What your budget is, because the areas, as we talked about earlier, France is so huge, the prices vary from area to area, and so does the climate, because the further north you are to the further south, the temperatures vary, and also coming into the centre, where it might be slightly cooler, but much warmer, other than this year than the UK, generally speaking. So it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a holiday home, for example, and you live in Yorkshire, you're probably more likely to look at areas like Normandy, Brittany, Pas de Calais, because you've already had to drive all the way down from Yorkshire, and you probably don't want to do the same drive again once you hit France. But also people that might want to go backwards and forwards to the UK, or have elderly parents and they want to travel quickly. They might have pets, so they want to be driving and not flying, or going any other way, then those areas are brilliant. They're absolutely beautiful. So Normandy, I would say, is a bit like Tudor England. You get a lot of the colombage and sort of those type style buildings with all the wood. Very, very pretty area, very popular with equestrian properties as well. So if you're looking at horses, a lot of equestrian properties in that area. Then as you come across west to Brittany, some of those coastlines are absolutely fantastic. They've got, I think Merlin was discovered, the wizard was there. But it's really pretty. But here the architecture changes slightly. You have more slate roofs and granite stone buildings, lots of thatched type cottages and things in that area as well.
Does that cause a problem with insurance?
Not really, no.
It certainly does here.
I'm sure it will, yeah. Yeah, it's they've been there for centuries. Well, the same, obviously with all the fires that have been happening this year across the whole of Europe with the extreme temperatures. But it is a very popular area, and Brittany and Normandy are very, very cost effective. You could buy a home there for €100,000, and you'd have 3 bedrooms, you'd have a nice piece of land, it would be in very good condition. It's close proximity to the UK. You've got popular flight resort, flights there as well. So they are very, very good areas. And we do see a lot of Brits buying there because it is the proximity of getting backwards and forwards. And if you just wanted to go over for the UK for a weekend or vice versa, it's very easy to do. So they're really good. Then as you start coming further down, you come into you've got the Loire Valley, which is again very popular, lots of chateaux in that area because it's very close to Paris. So a lot of the courtiers and things would have their chateaux built in that area. Very nice wine region as well, like Saumur, which is very nice. Then you come sort of down and you're coming into the de Sèvres and the Vendée, which is all the Charente area, the Poitou-Charentes area. Again, you've got beautiful coastline there. It's white, great big white sandy beaches in the Charente-Maritime. If you're actually on the coast, it's going to be slightly more pricier than if you're inland.
What sort of price spread are we talking
So
about?
if you were looking at the Charente-Maritime, for example, and you're looking at a 3-bedroom house, you'd probably be looking around 300,000 or 400,000. If you move into the Charente, into the countryside, you'd probably be looking at 100,000. So there's quite a difference the closer you get to the coast. But the nice thing is, if you live in the countryside, you can just go out to the coast for the day, and drive there and come back. So you can have the best of both worlds. But the Charente-Maritime is particularly beautiful. Then you come down, you're coming into the sort of Dordogne, the Nouvelle-Aquitaine areas. The Dordogne is probably one of the most popular areas for British people. It's beautiful countryside. You're driving through sunflowers. You've got Perigordine style roofs, which are like a pointy style roof, kind of sandstone coloured buildings. You've got the blue shutters that everybody, I want the blue shutters. You have your chickens and all of this sort of thing. So, and very cost effective. You'd be looking at around 150 to 200,000 for a 3-bedroom house. Of course, you can get very good chateaus as well. Escape to the chateau type property, under $1 million in these areas. Then you come into you're coming into sort of Bordeaux. So if you want city life, like Bordeaux is a fabulous city. It really is beautiful. You've got direct to Paris in 2 hours, a train. You've got flights coming out of Bordeaux. It's a very, very, very pretty town. But all of the areas surrounding that, you've got Saint-Emilion, which is a lovely wine region. You've got Bergerac, which has obviously got an airport as well. They're all very popular areas with Brits, particularly those that like wine, of course. And then
that's twice you've mentioned that.
I better start talking about the cheese. But so that's all wine region, all of those sort of areas, the Bordeaux region. Then you can come across into the centre of France, and so you've got the areas like the Limousin and the Creuse. If you're on a really small budget and you want a big property, that's the best area to buy. It's halfway down France in the middle, so you're you're halfway down. So you do get the lovely summers, a little bit more rainfall because you're in the middle as opposed to the outside. Again, you could buy a farmhouse there for maybe up to 100,000, perhaps. The average spend there is about 90,000 euros, but for nice big properties with lots of land. So if you were looking at trying to do a small holding or something of that nature, or you wanted to have your chickens and, live the good life, that's the perfect area because you get enough rain to feed the crops and the animals, etc. And it's very, very cost effective. The average house price in the Creuse is 63,000 euros. So, you wouldn't buy a garage for that in London, would you?
I'm just looking out the window here and thinking, a sort of 1-bedroom flat over there's touching 800,000.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had a chateau on the market recently, a 13-bedroom chateau in that Limousin area. It's 235,000 euros. Didn't need a lot of work, but it's just ridiculous. You couldn't build it for that. No. You couldn't even build a couple of bedrooms for that these days. But so it's really extremely good value for money. Okay. Then as you come further south, you come into sort of Languedoc-Roussillon area, which is beautiful. Here, and you've also got the Provence, which is slightly to the left. But the Languedoc-Roussillon is a big wine producing region as well, a lot of rosé. You have the Canal Midi that goes all the way up. And in the old days, the wine used to be taken from the Languedoc-Roussillon up the canal to Bordeaux. So a lot of rosé comes from that area. Much more of a Mediterranean feel there because you're on the border of Spain, quite close to Andorra. So the properties are different. So you'll see more of a villa type property or very, very old towns with, little tiny windy streets and sort of 3-metre wall sticks to keep the heat out, obviously, and the heat in.
I'm just trying to think, Andorra, you're going to get some skiing there, aren't you?
Yes, and it's also duty free. So, a lot of people do sort of pop over to Andorra to get their duty frees and come back out. But skiing, very, very popular for skiing, and it's very cheap. It's a lot cheaper than if you were going to ski in the Alps. But you also have the Midi-Pyrenees, which people forget is also a great ski area. It's lower than the Alps, so you wouldn't have it as long a season as you would in the Alps, but it's absolutely beautiful to ski in the Pyrenees as well. And there's some areas when you go down to the Pyrenees Atlantique, where you could be on the, skiing in the morning and in the beach in the afternoon. So you get the best of both worlds. They're sort of an hour apart, which
Sounds
is quite
like heaven,
nice.
doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. A perfect
So
place
if
to
we
live.
link that up with your wine producing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What more do you want?
Yeah, exactly. And then you come across, so from the Languedoc-Roussillon, which is, in fact, I love the Languedoc-Roussillon, you come across into the Provence. We've all seen, Life in the Provence or the book, or, a lot of the cookery programs that have been featured there. A lot of films are made there. This is where you come from sunflowers to lavender fields. So you're driving through beautiful lavender fields. The towns can be quite far apart. There's some really good ones like Aix-en-Provence. You've got Avignon, which is a really pretty city. And you've got all the sort of surrounding buildings. Again, it's very provincial style properties. You'd get big, quite expensive. The Provence is quite expensive. You'd be looking really at a budget of around 300,000 to buy something there, as opposed to maybe 100,000 in the Charente. So it does go up in price. And then you come across to the PACA, Provence-Alpes Côte d'Azur region, which is French Riviera. Again, that's always been popular, with the Cannes Film Festival, all of those sort of international events, the yachts, next to Monaco. Again, you've got to have a bigger budget. If you're looking at Cannes, you'd probably be needing at least 450,000. You can get little apartments a little bit cheaper.
For 450,000?
For 450, you probably get a villa. A nice villa with a pool, but it wouldn't be big. If you had 450,000 in the Limousin, you'd be buying a chateau. So that is the difference depending on where you are. But the reason for that is it's just a beautiful area, the Côte d'Azur. It's easy to rent out because you've got international people coming. When we talked about the Dordogne, for example, it's mainly French, English, Dutch, and Germans. In the Côte d'Azur, it's every nationality because it's so popular. You can fly into Nice, or you've got Saint-Tropez, which has always been beautiful. But you would have to have a little bit more of a bigger budget there. And then if you're coming round into the east of France, we'd be into the Alps, the French Alps. Again, the French Alps is affordable because there's so many different resorts. Depending on your budget is where you could, for example, in the Deux Alpes, it'd be a lot cheaper than if you were in Val d'Isère. So there's lots of different areas that you could look at and lots of different styles of properties that can suit your budget. There's a lot of new build coming into the Alps as well. So there you could buy off plan or you can buy on plan. And again, depending on how close you are to the lifts, how far you are from the resort.
Just one of the things about buying in any kind of ski resort, what always puts me off is the thought of a hugely busy ski season, being driven mad by noisy neighbours and all the rest of it. Is there a balance between people that live there all year round and those that just come for skiing?
I think you're going to have...
How would you cope with that?
I would say that you'll probably see some resorts, for example, Chamonix has more tourists in the summer than it does in the ski season. So it's a massive ski area, but it's fantastic if you're looking at investment because you are going to have all year round rental. But realistically speaking, there's not that many slack times because you'll have that sort of break between end of ski season and summer season, but the Alps are just as popular in the summer as it is in the winter because you've got all the outdoor activities, riding bikes, or you've got the whitewater rafting, or all of those type of outdoor mountaineering, climbing sports and things like that. So it's still as popular. So it depends what you're after. If you're looking for a peaceful life, then it might not be the place to go. However, saying that, if you go out into some of the just outside, for example, Annecy is a beautiful town. So you could, Brigitte Bardot had her little castle on the river there. And you could go slightly out of the resort into the countryside and you can pick up some lovely properties. And if you want to go in, it's a half an hour drive in to ski. So yeah, lots of opportunity.
Okay, well, Joanna, you never cease to amaze me with your knowledge of France. So thank you so much. I think we're all convinced, we're all moving very shortly, excellent. So we shall rely on you. No, thank you very much for coming in today. That was a very informative tour. Thank you so much. Well, that's all we've got time for on this Spotlight show. So join me again next time. I'm Stephen Galpin. Good to have you watching. See you next time.